The second speaker on opposition is Stephen Kinnock. Stephen has served as a member for Aberavon since 2015. He currently is the Shadow Minister for the Armed Forces, and before that served as Shadow Foreign Minister. Stephen, I'm looking forward to your speech.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here as a proud alumnus of Queen's College, Cambridge. Could I say what an honour it is to return to my old stomping ground. I think the last time I was dressed like this in Cambridge, I was trying to climb over the wall at Trinity to crash the May Ball, but let's leave that story right there. I graduated in June 1992, a time of seismic change and tremendous optimism. The Berlin Wall had just been torn down by the forces of liberty, self-determination, and democracy. The Soviet Union had crumbled and the Cold War was over. The Maastricht Treaty establishing the European Union had been signed. The single market was up and running, and as its architect, the United Kingdom was at the heart of the EU's flagship project. Meanwhile, our relationship with the United States had been reinforced by the important part that our armed forces had played in the coalition which drove Iraqi forces out of Kuwait in the first Gulf War. Fast forward 30 years, and what a contrast. Russia has massed well over 100,000 troops on the Ukrainian border, and the British government is mired in scandal whilst desperately trying to play catch-up in the diplomatic effort to de-escalate. Last summer, President Biden didn't even bother to pick up the phone to Boris Johnson before deciding to withdraw from Afghanistan. And we are engaged in a seemingly endless war of words with the European Union over everything from fish to financial services to the Northern Ireland Protocol. Of course, I am not saying that Britain has left the stage completely. This year we hosted the G7 and the COP26, and as a permanent member of the UN Security Council and the world's sixth largest economy, the United Kingdom certainly continues to have global significance. But if I were to compare our position and standing on the world stage in 1992 to our position and standing on the world stage in 2022, I would be forced to conclude that we have never been more diminished, isolated, or marginalized. And this is particularly troubling at a time when democracy is in retreat. Authoritarian regimes outnumber democracies for the first time since 2001 across the world. And when China is ever more assertively promoting its so-called responsive authoritarianism as a systemic rival to democracy. Mr. President, prior to 2016, the question that's before this House this evening would simply not have been relevant or necessary. But now it is a choice that we must all consider for the simple reason that we have left the European Union. However, the reality is that whilst the referendum result may have fundamentally altered our political and trading relationship with the European Union, it did not change the simple and timeless fact that this country's destiny is primarily determined by its geography. And our physical proximity to continental Europe leads inexorably to the shared history, culture, values, and interests that shape our European identity. Of course, Britain should always seek to engage politically, economically, and institutionally with our allies, wherever they are. And we must remember that weakening ties with one partner or set of partners will inevitably weaken ties with them all. But if you can't engage constructively with your closest neighbours, then what chance have you got when you're attempting to strengthen ties with old friends who may be further afield? Or indeed, when you're seeking to forge new partnerships with countries on the other side of the world. The United Kingdom is in Europe, of Europe, and with Europe, regardless of Brexit. When Europe thrives, we thrive too. When Europe slumps, we slump too. And when Europe fights, we fight too. Of course, this doesn't mean that we should downgrade the transatlantic relationship or stop seeking to strengthen and build new trade, diplomatic, and people-to-people connections around the world. But could I gently suggest that we temper these grand strategies with some hard-headed realism? Our relationship with the United States is, of course, of central importance, but the Americans are increasingly focused on the Indo-Pacific, and the spectre of the return of Donald Trump, or possibly something even worse, is looming larger every day. We must therefore be realistic and recognize that the special relationship alone cannot sustain our prosperity or our place in the world. In fact, we must accept the lessons of the Iraq War and conclude that an over-reliance on our transatlantic ties cannot possibly be in our national strategic interest. Meanwhile, some argue that we should now tilt towards the Indo-Pacific as a potential foreign policy priority. But I'm afraid that this is yet another example of global Britain boosterism and wishful thinking. Of course, it's important that we continue to strengthen and build our ties with democratic partners in the Pacific and in Asia, not least as a bulwark against an increasingly aggressive China. But sending an aircraft carrier to the other side of the world from time to time is unlikely to have a transformative effect. And military experts, both in the UK and the US, know that Britain will best serve its interests and the interests of the international order by focusing its resources on the security of Europe. And we should, of course, have confidence in our global role, but the global Britain rhetoric smacks more of a government that is driven more by an ideological aversion to Europe than it is by a strategy that is rooted in our national interest.
On that point,
I will give way.
haven't the past few days or weeks shown that it has been often an Anglo-American push for security, particularly in Eastern Europe? And in the case of much of our European partners, they have been particularly weak, with Macron saying we must strive for a European Union-focused strategy to Ukraine, and Germany only sending 500 helmets. Meanwhile, we send God knows how many anti-tank rifles.
Look, a lot has been said by Germany in this debate, particularly by the previous speaker. And I do think that we have to recognize the historic reality of Germany and its place in the world. And I think that there's absolutely no doubt that that still plays a dominant role in the political discourse in Germany. But let's also recognize that NATO is a European and transatlantic alliance, and NATO has been front and center of the discussions around what to do with Russia. Jens Stoltenberg, the General Secretary of NATO, has been very prominent. So I think we should see this as an umbrella which includes Europe and the United States. I think otherwise it's a false binary.
Germany is so worried about its historical responsibilities. Why is it the fourth biggest arms exporter in the world? Or is it more to do with German energy policy and a reliance on Russian energy, a reliance when it comes to Russia in terms of its export policy? If it was so bothered about its historical position in the world in terms of causing conflict, would it be the fourth biggest arms exporter in the world?
There are many things about German foreign policy that I am deeply opposed to. I think Germany has a mercantilist view of the world, and that is something to be regretted. But we're talking here about our relationship with Europe. I think there's tremendous potential for more military and security cooperation with France. France is a serious player militarily, spends its 2%. Look at the Lancaster House Accords, huge opportunities there for more military cooperation. What a pity that we have a Europhobic government that is burning all of those bridges and preventing us from building a new foreign policy.
On that point,
I'll take one more intervention.
you made the point about the United Kingdom tilting at windmills for a bit, or global Britain boosterism. Then you've also spoken about France as a great geopolitical power. If the Indo-Pacific was not a place where the United Kingdom could play such a great role, why was France so profoundly worried about AUKUS and the view that it was retreating geopolitically in the Indo-Pacific? Clearly the Indo-Pacific is a geopolitical future for not just the United Kingdom, but other European powers as well, and the United Kingdom should be tilting into the Indo-Pacific.
The Indo-Pacific is a very important place, there's no doubt about that. But with the limited resources that we have to make choices. Politics is about choices, strategic choices, based on geopolitical priorities, but based also on realism and the resources that are available. And the reality is that the United States needs to be the first mover in the Indo-Pacific. I welcome AUKUS, I think it's a very good initiative, but I think that the way it was done behind the backs of the French was simply not helpful. It was childish, and it ended up, I think, clouding what could have been otherwise a very good story. So having applied our reality check to both the transatlantic relationship and to the Indo-Pacific tilt, we are bound to conclude that whilst they are vitally important elements of British foreign policy, our number one priority must always be our engagement with our friends, partners, and allies on the other side of the English Channel. And whether we like it or not, the first point of contact in this regard has to be the European Union. Yes, the institutions and alliances holding the EU together are complex and multi-layered, and this can at times be a source of frustration. But the fact is that we live in a complex and multi-layered world, a world in which there truly is strength in numbers. I've just been told I have 1 minute left, and I've still got quite a lot of my speech to go, so I'm begging the forgiveness of the President, if I may. So having established the primacy of the EU in the past and present of British foreign policy, allow me to say a few words about the future relationship between the UK and the European Union. Whilst I regret the outcome of the 2016 referendum, I have always accepted it, and I argued for a form of Brexit that became known as Common Market 2.0, which would have seen us staying within the single market by joining the European Economic Area alongside Norway and Iceland, ultimately positioning the UK as a leading voice in an outer ring of non-EU, pro-European countries. Common Market 2.0 was based on pragmatism and compromise, but sadly there wasn't much appetite for those quintessentially British virtues during the fevered, highly polarised days of 2016 to 2019. We've therefore ended up with a deal that, far from being oven-ready, is a dog's dinner that's created, just to continue the dog theme, that's creating difficulties across every aspect of UK-EU relations. But we are where we are. We must look now forward with a combination of realism and optimism. We should concentrate our efforts on rebuilding the bridges that have been burned since 2016, with patience, pragmatism, and attention to detail. By focusing on the technical issues that are causing so much difficulty, we can build confidence and create a broader, deeper political relationship. To conclude, the world has changed beyond recognition since I left this university in '92. Fukuyama's utopian end of history has been replaced by an age of anxiety as China flexes its muscles and Russian troops mass on the Ukrainian border. But two facts have remained constant. The first is that Britain is still a country with huge potential and strength. And the second is that successful foreign policy requires careful analysis and sustained effort, not sound bites, hubris, and wishful thinking. Britain alone is not a strategy. It is a dangerous fantasy that will set us on the road to irrelevance. Let us instead forge a new European policy that sees us as a constructive partner of the EU, trading with minimum friction, building maximum dialogue so that we can strengthen our collective European security and prosperity. And let us use that reset with the EU as a springboard for strengthening and deepening our transatlantic ties. In short, let us get to work and start re-engaging with our European friends, partners, and allies so that we can face the world and the future with confidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I must say the quality of debate is very good this evening. It feels like it's in the balance, this debate, so I'm hoping a floor speech will swing it.